Are alien abductions real? We're going to look at that topic in this episode of the Mysterion Files. Welcome to the show. Thanks for tuning in. We're going to look at some of the history of the so-called alien abductions, which became popular with the Betty and Barney Hill case back in the 1960s, Travis Walton in the 70s, Whitley Strieber in the 80s. We're going to look at some of the characteristics of the alien abductions. We're going to look at some of the theories. So thanks for checking it out. Welcome to the show. Let's just dive on in. The modern UFO movement became popular in the late 1940s with the advent of Ken Arnold and his sightings and the various projects with the Air Force and the classics. And we had, not long after Kenneth Arnold, we had the Roswell sighting, and there was a lot of stuff going on with UFOs in the 1940s and 50s. And while alien abduction accounts or accounts of other kinds of beings abducting people were not really new, they had been around for a while, but they became more popular with certain accounts, especially with the Betty and Barney Hill episode in 1961. But what really brought all this on? What brought on all these so-called alien encounters and UFOs and everything? We're going to look at that today. We're going to see what are some of the theories, what's going on with some of this, and why would people be talking about aliens? What are some of the theories possibly between, what one person thinks is an alien abduction and somebody else thinks is some kind of a psychological answer or something. So what is going on here? We're going to look at that. But the modern abduction phenomena really began in the 1950s and 60s. Probably the most popular account of an alien abduction was Betty and Barney Hill in 1961. This is one of the first widely popularized alien abduction cases. And they were returning from a trip in New Hampshire and saw what they claimed to be a light approaching them. And they claimed later it would be a UFO and describe it as a pancake. And they were scared. They tried to outrun it. And the next thing they knew, they're parking their car. They're being let out of the car by these, what they would later refer to as alien beings. They were led into what they called a spaceship or a UFO, and they underwent what we're going to see is a typical kind of characteristic of all these encounters, which is going to be probing and experimentation and that kind of thing. Well, they made a home, and yet another characteristic, as we're going to see, is going to be missing time. They had 2 hours they could not account for. They had things wrong with their car that was weird. They didn't feel right. Betty changed her clothes. And what was interesting, that these people were very reliable. They were reliable witnesses in their community. They were trustworthy people, so they weren't people who could just brush off as crazy. And they both maintained the same story. But a couple of years went by, some time went by, and they just couldn't shake what happened. And so long story short, they went and they ended up being hypnotized. This is a common theme among alien abduction cases, is you have people who are hypnotized, who are the hypnotist tries to get into the minds of those who were abducted to try to draw out what might be kind of pushed down and submerged by the person to keep it out of the consciousness of that person. Or in this case with Betty and Barney Hill, they were told by the so-called alien beings not to remember what they experienced. And so as soon as they saw the craft flying away, they no longer remembered what was going on. And so it was not until they were hypnotized and all these things came about. And the session, the hypnosis session, was very dramatic. It was very emotional. It had a lot of terror associated with it. And Betty and Barney Hill relived all of this according to the hypnotists and their own accounts. And they claim that they were actually abducted by aliens. This was in 1961. This is one of the most well-known accounts of abductions that there were. This is one of the first accounts of the classic gray aliens, the gray beings, or all kinds of different kind of aliens mentioned with different people. Have the grays, the Nordics, which look very much like white humans from what you would think of in the Nordic area, reptilians, but these are the classic grays that people talk about. And the grays are typically seen to be a little bit more on the malevolent side than, say, the Nordics are. So Betty claimed to have seen a star map. The question is, was it really a star system? Fast forward to 1975, you have Travis Walton. This is my favorite case, if I have a favorite case, because I think it is the most reliable. People point to Betty and Barney Hill as being the most reliable, but there are more people involved in the Travis Walton case than there were in the Betty and Barney Hill case. So nobody other than Betty and Barney Hill were involved in their incident. What happened with Travis was very interesting and involved 6 other people who claimed to have witnessed the event. Now, Travis and his friends were lumberjacks. This is going on in Arizona. They were out, they were doing their jobs, they were cutting down trees, and they got done for the day. They got in the truck and they headed out to go home, and they noticed a light in the woods. They thought it was a fire going on in the woods, and so they went to investigate what was going on, and they claimed they saw a UFO, a large UFO. They stopped the truck. Travis Walton is young, is his early 20s, I believe. He got out of the truck, and they admonished him not to go any further. Travis says, "Don't go out of the truck. We don't know what this is." He approaches a UFO, according to what they say and what he says himself. He gets pretty close to it, and then a beam of light comes out of the UFO, knocks him down, and then he begins to hover like it was sucking him off the ground. Well, his friends hightail it. They get in the truck and they just take off. So they all claim to have seen this. They leave him there. They go down the road. They are terrified. Then they realize we probably should go check on Travis. So they go back to the site. UFO is not there. Travis is not there. Nothing is there that they saw, and they just don't know what happened. So they go back to town. They eventually will contact the sheriff and say, we don't know what happened. We lost Travis. And of course, the authorities thought that this was actually a murder and that they had done away with the body and they were using the UFOs as a cover-up. There were also some questions about their contracts with their logging company. And the question was, well, is this going to help them kind of get out of some trouble with their contracts? But for 5 days, you don't know where Travis was. On the 5th day, he shows up, disoriented. He calls his friends. They come back and get him. So they call, during all this, the sheriff calls one of the best polygraphers in the state. And he comes down there to where they are and he gives them all a polygraph. And they all 6 passed the polygraph except for one. One was inconclusive, but the other 5 are conclusive in saying that they believe what they are saying. And that doesn't prove that what they said happened, but it does prove what they said that they believe it. Now, I know there's a lot of controversy with lie detectors and all that kind of thing, but they were convinced, the law enforcement officers and the polygraphers were convinced that these kids, and they were young, believed what they were saying. Not that they were accurate necessarily, but that they believed that what they were saying was true. Well, when Travis showed back up, obviously it's not a murder. And so they're trying to figure out what, they're going to have all these UFO groups come in to try to figure out with Travis what is going on. And Travis maintains that he was taken aboard a spaceship, that he was abducted for several days, has a hard time remembering things, but some time goes by and he tries to figure out what all happened to him. And like many people who have these experiences, he says he woke up and there were all these beings around him and they were doing tests on him and experiments. This is a very common experience with those who say that they are being abducted by aliens. Fast forward to 1985, another very popular account is with Whitley Strieber, and he is the author of a book called Communion, which tells about his story regarding his experiences here. This has popularized the abduction experiences and these kind of things that were going on. He and his family had gone to their cabin up in the Northeast to have a weekend getaway. This is around Christmas time, 1985. And he wakes up in the middle of the night and he goes downstairs. He hears things, he sees things, and he is taken by these beings ultimately to this ship. And he goes in the ship, and like many other people, he says that he is probed, he is tested, he has all experiments performed on him. And the way that these beings talk to him is not with language like I'm talking to you with the spoken word, as it were, but they communicated telepathically. This is a typical characteristic of abduction experiences. And so he describes having this telepathic contact, intense fear, and again, missing time. Missing time, again, is a common characteristic of these experiences, that people lose time that they cannot account for. Okay, well, his story sparked mainstream media attention as well as skepticism, and his book Communion and his other books come out as well. He went on several TV shows, Oprah, I believe, as did, I think, Travis Walton. And so he became a media sensation. He became somebody who came out saying that this happened to him, and he became very well known for it. Still, he's not sure what happened. He thinks these beings are aliens, and he says that he believes that they were benevolent, but he's not really sure. And that's a very interesting admission by him, is he does not really know if these aliens really are good or bad. And he describes them as the grays, as we saw with the experience of Travis Walton. Now, I've mentioned some characteristics already. Well, here's some characteristics that people talk about in their experiences of alien abduction. Missing time, number one. People lose hours or even days with no memory. Another is medical examinations. They often describe strange procedures, having these aliens that seem like they're doctors that are performing weird procedures on them. Oftentimes they will examine their genitalia. There oftentimes is a sexual component to this, that they describe having a sexual experience with these beings. Paralysis is another characteristic. Mind control. Victims feel unable to move or even to resist. And this happens oftentimes in what are called bedroom visitations. These are so common that they actually have a name. Yes, there are bedroom visitations where a person is lying in bed and apparently awake, and these beings, they can be described in various ways: at the foot of the bed, by the bed. They can sometimes walk through the wall. They just appear, and they're terrifying experiences. And the person is so overcome with fear that they cannot move or resist in many cases. There are oftentimes communication, like with telepathy, for example. So these beings communicate through telepathy, mind, through their minds with the person that they're trying to talk to. All kinds of genetic experiences. I've already mentioned that sometimes there are sexual experiences that are mentioned. Some people say that there are breeding going on, that these aliens are trying to breed with human beings. Sleep proximity, I mentioned this already, that these occurrences oftentimes happen, not always, but oftentimes happen when a person is in bed. And so this will lead some people to believe that what actually is going on is sleep paralysis. And so that will lead some people to more of a skeptical view. We'll look at sleep paralysis more as look at these different theories. One interesting aspect of these theories that people will note are owls. And I have a funny story about that. So I was watching a movie. It was called Close Encounters of the Fourth Kind. And it's about alien abduction experiences. It's a little bit of a disturbing movie. So if you want to watch it, be forewarned. But what is often interesting about these movies and accounts is that people have these experiences or even watch these movies or read about them. They're not usually very uplifting. So the stories of encountering UFOs, the stories of encountering aliens or other beings, are oftentimes not very uplifting, but rather they are terrifying. They have negative experiences. They will lead a lot of times to depression, suicide. There are cases where people have had negative biological effects from being around UFOs or aliens, supposedly, and there are those who actually have been reported to have died. So anyway, I'm watching this movie, Close Encounters of the Fourth Kind, and one of the themes of the movie is owls. People will see owls as they are right before they're going to be abducted or sometime before they're going to be abducted. And I'm watching it. I had at the time I had a dog, so I take my dog outside, and I'm looking for the owls about midnight. And I live out in the more wooded area, and so I'm looking around for the owls, right? And all the aliens come get me. Go back inside, finish the movie. It's about 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning when I finish it and go to bed. And then I wake up. My wife wakes me up in the morning, and she says, "Ryan, you got to come see this cool owl that's outside our room." And sure enough, there was an owl that was perched on the tree outside of our room. And what the interesting thing wasn't just the timing, although that was very interesting. It was also, it's not just the hour of the proximity of the movie, but the movie took place in the first few days of October 1st, or I want to say 5th or 7th. And the day I watched it and the day I saw the owl was October 3rd. So, kind of weird. All right. But owls, people will see owls. There actually is a book that I'm listening to on Audible right now called The Messengers. And it is about owls. It is about how owls relate to the UFO phenomena and the overall alien abductions and all those kind of things, that people have these weird experiences and how owls fit in. A lot of times the owls are not normal looking owls. They're 4 feet tall. They're of a look of a species that don't really exist. They kind of come with all these kind of paranormal and supernatural, some people will call them, characteristics, and it's just weird, not really normal owls. But there are lots of reports of owls before a person is abducted or sees these kind of events. And as I mentioned with the Betty and Barney Hill episode, hypnosis is oftentimes associated with these abductions. People will go to a hypnotist and see what they can learn about their experience. In fact, this will happen in Close Encounters of the Fourth Kind. People would go see a hypnotist. And there's a lot of controversy with hypnotherapy because you have to be careful not to make suggestions and plant ideas in people's heads. That's one of the controversies about hypnosis, is that you don't know what the people are implanting into their patients. Interestingly, one well-known person who was involved in hypnosis and research like this was John Mack from Harvard University. He was a psychologist. And so, somebody from Harvard University has, high pedigree. And so he got into somewhat of some trouble with his work at Harvard, trying to figure out what was going on with these abduction experiences. And he would actually say that he was having these experiences as well, that he not only did research on people, but he himself had certain kinds of these experiences that you would see with ufology, and he could not figure out what was going on. But Mack had a lot of research done at Harvard. Ultimately was okay, but he was kind of threatened at Harvard about what he was doing because he didn't want to bring that kind of disrepute to Harvard, and it was just such a Ivy League school. So what is going on with this? What are some of the theories? Well, one theory is simply a literal extraterrestrial view. And this is the idea that aliens really are visiting the planet Earth from other places, other planets around the galaxy or wherever. And they are actually kidnapping people. Now, these are real. In this theory, the ET theory, the extraterrestrial theory, they are real physical beings visiting from other places. They are abducting people. Sometimes they're abducted. They take plants. They'll take animals. We see a lot of cattle mutilation associated with UFOs and alien abduction, that kind of thing as well. Possible connections to genetic manipulation, breeding programs, and whatever. And some people will have said, and there's these conspiracy theories, that the U.S. government actually is allowing these beings to abduct people in exchange for technology. Now, of course, this is a conspiracy theory, but the ET theory is one theory. Now, there are problems with this, I think, in my view. One reason I think that these are not really aliens is because we have people, ufologists, who are bona fide researchers who are working with the government, the Air Force, bona fide research programs around the world, universities, and they make good arguments that these beings really are not aliens. One, for example, is Jacques Vallée. Now, Jacques Vallée is a French researcher who has backgrounds in information systems as well as astronomy or astrophysics. And he makes a number of arguments against the ET or the alien view. One of them, he says, is strictly from an evolutionary point of view. If you're an atheist or you don't hold to a God, if you maintain that life has come about simply from evolution, you're not going to have another species, let alone many species, that have the same basic anatomical structure as humans. The head, torso, arms, and legs, eyes, nose. Can I get there? Here we go. Eyes, nose, mouth, being able to see in the same color spectrum, being able to hear the way that we do. That's just not going to happen from a naturalistic point of view. Now, if you hold to a theistic point of view, where you think that God exists and that God is ultimately the cause of all beings, including aliens, well, then that would ratchet up the possibility for such aliens, and that would change the probability there. Another problem that Vallée has is that you have repeatedly over centuries, you've got many, if you don't have all the reports, so people don't want to report this stuff. So we have probably not even 10% of the reports of all the events that people, if they really did a report, how many UFO sightings there were, how many abductions there are, and it would be at least in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of reports of UFO sightings, alien abductions, and so forth. And they do the same thing pretty much. They will come and they will take people, they'll poke and prod them, they will do all these experiments to them. They will take plants, they'll take animals, they will mutilate cows and whatever. And Vallée's point is, well, how many times does it take? How many experiments does it take on people and cows, animals, whatever, and plants to get the data you need? Does it take millions or hundreds of thousands or even tens of thousands of times? And these procedures are done in a very rudimentary way. They're even less sophisticated than what we have in our own medical technology, it seems. And so Vallée thinks there are really good arguments to suggest that these really are not aliens. Another, he doesn't even mention this, and that's interstellar travel. Of course, that's a huge debate about can UFOs even get here? Even if there were such aliens, could they be here? But Vallée tries to put this in the context of anthropology and folklore, saying that we have throughout history, centuries and millennia, of reports of UFO sightings, of alien abductions that aren't necessarily in the gray people form, but with the fairy folklore and people that you see in Ireland and around the world who have beings take people, kidnap them, and there's a lot of similarities with how they use food, with how they interact with people, and he thinks that this is really just not an alien issue as much as it is a folklore issue. His own view is an interdimensional view where we have physical beings that have somehow figured out how to move between space and time dimensions and to be able to influence people. And he thinks that the reason these beings are doing this is because they want to control our thoughts, they want to control our worldview. You know, one thing I used to ask as a Christian is, well, because the Christian answer oftentimes, as we're going to see later on in the show, is demons, that the aliens or whatever they are really, really demonic. And I went along with that for a while, and I thought, why would demons care if we believed in aliens or not? And then I started reading people like Hugh Ross, who points to Jacques Vallée and J. Allen Hynek and John Keel and others, who say that whatever these beings are, they're very deceptive. In fact, behind the camera, I have a book called Messengers of Deception I have on my UFO shelf by Jacques Vallée. And the whole book is about how these beings really are deceptive. They want to control your thoughts, your worldview, your belief system. I thought, well, that might be something consistent with demons, because they do want to deceive us and change our views and worldviews of things. So Vallée puts forth several options about why, and arguments why he doesn't think. I'll only give a few as to why these are not really alien beings. Another view other than the ET view, is a psychological view. Now, when I say psychological, I can mean two different things here. One would just mean that somebody is having a psychological problem where it's really a subjective issue, where there's nothing out there really. It's merely subjective in the sense that we are experiencing something that's caused by our own minds, and that's really all there is to it. And there are many people who believe in that what is going on ultimately is this kind of subjective view, this psychological view. And many will put this into the same category as sleep paralysis, where this can't happen, where you wake up and you're somewhat awake, but you're still dreaming, but you're somewhat awake, and you really can't control. You can't move. You can't control your body, and so this will bring in a lot of fear and make your dreams feel like they're really happening, that they actually are real. And so many people will say, we'll put the hypnosis stuff in this category too, that this is a memory implanting mechanism. And then some neuroscientists will tell us that the brain fills in gaps when confronted with the unknown. So what could the brain simply be filling in the gaps here with what we think are aliens? Another view is let me go back to the psychological view. Another psychological view really is more of a psychic view, which is held by someone like J. Allen Hynek, who worked with the Air Force for many years in their various UFO projects. Now, Hynek did believe, after some years of being a skeptic, that there is some truth to the UFO phenomena. He didn't think that was the case before, but after doing his experiments in his research with the Air Force, he came to believe that there actually is some kind of real event going on with UFOs, and ultimately with these alien encounters. He thought those are the real weird ones, these close encounters. In fact, he coined the terms close encounters of the first kind, second kind, third kind. And so he is well known in this area. He's well established as a researcher. And his view here is that what's going on is more of a psychic view. A great book that between him and Jacques Vallée in a sit-down interview discussion called The Edge of Reality is where Hynek is discussing and somewhat arguing with Vallée, saying that what we have here is not a physical phenomenon. Now, Vallée thinks it is physical. Hynek doesn't. Hynek will compare the phenomena that we see with UFOs and aliens and all that to what we see with poltergeist activity and paranormal activity. In fact, we have a bibliography put out by the Air Force in the last year of Project Blue Book, 1969, that compares the characteristics of people's encounters with UFOs and aliens to parapsychology, demonic possession, the occult even, and so forth. So there is this other kind of psychic view that goes alongside this idea that it is actually objective. It's objectively real. It's kind of like an energy, and that's kind of what John Keel would say, who's famous for the Mothman prophecies. But they think that there's more of an energy that's not really physical, contrary to Vallée, who thinks it was physical, just not aliens. Now, another view is sometimes the same word is used as Vallée, interdimensional, or a spiritual view. Could these aliens really be masquerading as, could they really be spiritual entities masquerading as these kind of aliens? Well, it kind of fits somewhat of what Vallée says in his view, because he thinks that they are masquerading as deceivers. And it also kind of fits in with what Hynek and Keel and others say, because they're not really physical beings. They come across as physical. They make you think they're physical, but they really are deceivers. And Keel and Hynek will go along with it. They both will say that these are very much like these kind of poltergeist activity. They're deceivers. They're not what they seem to be. And much of the encounters that people have with these so-called aliens are very much in line with what we see with demonic encounters, the paranormal, these kind of poltergeist activity, even with what we see with recent government investigations. So, for example, the government has come out and doing investigations at Skinwalker Ranch. This is a well-known research project that has been going on since the 90s, especially since the early 2000s. And these were not people who were going out commissioned by the Baptist Church or anything. They were government employees. Some of them were like George Knapp, for example, who were journalists and investigators looking at these claims that we have at Skinwalker Ranch. And they pretty much all said there was some kind of weird paranormal events going on. And one of them coined the term hitchhiker effect. I think that was Jim Lukatsky who coined that term. So when they went home, they took something with them. They had a hitchhiker. And so they went home and their families would actually report really weird things going on, things that would go on at Skinwalker Ranch, seeing these skinwalkers, these really weird wolf-looking things, these shapeshifters, weird orbs that would fly through the house or float through the house that they would see at Skinwalker Ranch, that are also very common in typical UFO stories, in abduction stories. They would have shadowy figures in their rooms, in their children's rooms, and it was very, very frightening and terrifying. So frightening that actually George Knapp will not even talk about some of his own experiences with he and his wife, and I believe it was in the bedroom for another, again, bedroom visitation. So one of the reasons I don't think that these really are physical beings is that aliens don't really explain the data. And that is another thing that Jacques Vallée says, that just these aliens coming from whatever star system don't really fully explain the data. They don't really explain that why do you typically have these weird things like a cryptid encounter like Bigfoot or Mothman with UFOs? Why do you have these ghostly encounters like you would see in poltergeist movies? Why do you have things where one researcher who went to Skinwalker Ranch had a bottle of wine fly off the shelf across the room? Why do you hear disembodied voices or footsteps or car doors or babies crying when there's not such things? I'm discussing this in my room late at night in the dark. Is a little bit freaky sometimes. But why do you have all this? It just doesn't seem to be explainable simply by the presence of physical aliens. Not to mention that these aliens come in different ships. They come in different species. So again, Vallée's criticism of, well, you got these different beings. How do we account for them if you just through natural evolution? They would have to come from different places, have different ships, all these kind of things. And now again, that changes if you're a theist. But we have to take into consideration all of these supernatural and paranormal activity that all these things that go on alongside these UFO encounters, especially with the closer encounters, like the close encounter of the third kind, which involve the contact with these alleged beings. Now, one very interesting aspect of all this is through a MUFON researcher, Mutual UFO Network. This is a civilian group that investigates UFOs, aliens, and all this. One of them, Joe Jordan, who was not a Christian before his research, who became a Christian because of his research, and has his own ministry now called CE4 Research Group, and has a book out describing what I'm about to tell you. His book is called Piercing the Cosmic Veil, You Shall Not Be Afraid of the Terror by Night. I'll put that book in the description in case you want to check it out. But Joe's testimony here is very interesting. And what he says is that in his research, he came into contact with many people who claim to have had alien abduction experiences. But they did not seem to fit the typical ET mold. For example, in one instance, he was talking to a person, and his girlfriend was there. I think it was Joe's girlfriend. Was talking to this person in his living room. And the person said, "I'm about to be abducted." And he went unconscious and claimed to have gone to the UFO, the ship. Same thing happened in someone's car. I can't remember if it's the same person or not. But there are people who have these. There's multiple times where people will say they were abducted while being watched by other people in their living room or in some place. And they claim to have gone to some spaceship and they didn't even leave the room. So what Joe noticed in his own research is that people did what no one said could be done. Remember when I said that people couldn't resist the phenomena? Well, there was a pattern that Joe noticed, and that is that people would cry out the name of Jesus to help them, to save them. And in many, if not most instances, not everyone, but in many instances, that would make the phenomena stop. They would feel like they were being abducted. They felt like they were being oppressed. They had these terrible, terrifying beings in their rooms or in different places, in their homes, wherever they were, and they would call out on Jesus, and the abduction experience, the phenomena, whatever was going on, would stop. And so Joe thought this was very strange. So he asked his friends and MUFON, we say that we can't stop these things, but these people, and they're by the hundreds, Joe would find out, if not thousands. And he lists hundreds, though, in his book and website. And the people at MUFON said something very interesting. They said, we know, but we can't go there because it's religious. So you, by all means, you go there, but we can't go there because it is a religious explanation, and we just can't. So Joe did all this research, put out his book and website that gives hundreds of accounts of people saying, I was having this experience, and I called on the name of Jesus, and these experiences stopped. And interestingly, it's not just with aliens. In fact, I was watching a documentary. I sat down and watched a documentary on Mothman. And as I sat down, this was a really weird thing that happened. I sat down to watch this documentary on Mothman. And I get an email. I've been emailing Joe Jordan a little bit back and forth because he saw one of my blogs. I'll link to it in the description. And he just said, I thought you'd begin to find this interesting. And it was a documentary on Mothman. And he said that it's not just aliens that have to obey the name of Jesus. He showed me a little clip of this guy who had an experience of what would probably call Mothman or something like Mothman, calling on the name of Jesus, and the Mothman experience stopped. And the Mothman experience stopping. And ironically, that was the exact documentary I had to actually pull up. I think I had to pause it to read Joe's emails. It was just that kind of a weird coincidence. And I wrote Joe back. I said, well, that was a weird coincidence. And Joe said, there's no such thing as coincidences. God wanted you to watch that and see this. So very interesting, very strange. But it's not just aliens and what we call aliens. Another thing that I think makes this more likely a spiritual demonic phenomena is that, well, yeah, they do seem to, at least in most instances, obey the name of Jesus. But they are also very, not just anti-religious, but they're anti-Christian. In the Urantia books and many of the teachings of the contactees, who are people who said they were in contact with these beings, they weren't abducted, but they had these telepathic communication. They could almost summon them at will, as it were. And many of these people would say that they had these interactions with these beings, and these beings would say that Jesus was just a normal person or even an alien himself, and they would downplay the deity of Jesus. They would downplay his divinity and his superiority and uniqueness, and try to say this is all just he's one of us. This is all part of the kind of the cosmic plan, as it were. Stephen Greer, who's a well-known person who has done documentaries on this, like him, many people think that these are the teachings behind these beings are very mystical. They're very New Agey. They're very Buddhistic. They're very anti-theistic, anti-Christian. So this all plays into the part of, well, again, why I asked, why would demons care if I believed in aliens or not? Well, when we have non-Christian researchers like John Keel and Jacques Vallée and others saying that these are very deceptive beings, they want to control your thoughts, they want to control what you believe, that is very interesting. And so there have been many cases of people claiming to have been abducted by aliens, have encounters with aliens or UFOs. And what's really going on? In some cases, it probably is just psychological. They are having some kind of subjective problem that they need help with. Sometimes people are maybe having ideas implanted in them by others, hypnotists or whatever. Sometimes maybe they are seeing things that are just misidentifications. And sometimes it's a real thing. And sometimes I think this is the real thing. And it's the phenomena, I think, of deception. It's more of a spiritual phenomena. And so be aware of this. I think the church needs to talk more about this. There are people who are looking for answers, and the church is not really wanting to go there because it's still a weird thing. It still has a stigma, but we have to go there as the church. We have to talk about these things. We have to discuss the paranormal. And as John Keel says, it's dangerous. And Keel is not just unchristian. He's very anti-Christian. And he says that people should stay away from this stuff, stay away from UFO studies, stay away from all this paranormal stuff, especially if you're younger, especially if you are easily taken into things, if you're gullible, and those kind of things, because they will prey on you and they will suck you in. And the phenomena, as I've been studying more and more, getting more outside of just ufology into paranormal stuff in general, the phenomena is very deceitful, and it will suck you in, and it will take you away from what is good and holy and down a life of despair and depression. So, but the first step is being aware of what's going on. So there are lots of accounts and stories, and to be aware of them and you know what's going on. Thanks for checking out the Mysterion Files today. Hope you enjoyed it. Leave me a comment. Please like the video. Please subscribe if you want to see more of this stuff. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.